Yoga is such a powerful practice for transformational change. Welcome, and that was a quote from my guest speaker today, Galen. He's a climate yogi activist, founder of climateyoga.org. He takes part in sunrise yoga movements, youth movements, and co-ops, all-age co-ops. He's a marine biologist by profession, retired now, and dedicating his life to informing and educating people on their ability to shift their perspective via yoga and consider the climate a little bit more. If you're interested in some of the practices that he talks on today, I want to invite you to check out the description section below, where we have a video that we produced together many years ago called the 6 Ways of Yoga. It's a fantastic practice to do, and thank you so much for joining. Stick around to the end, where he talks about some of his favorite books and recommendations, how you can further educate yourself on your own long after this interview ends. Thank you so much. Have a blessed day. Welcome to Yoga for You, a channel tailored to helping you discover your very own unique yoga practice. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Sagacity Spotlight. Today, I'm joined with my climate yogi friend, Galen, and our paths crossed in Sedona at a Sedona Yoga Festival, and around that time is when the seed was planted to create something that has now blossomed into this Yoga for You channel. So I'd like to welcome Galen on. Welcome, Galen. So nice to have you on the channel yet again. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ty, and thanks for having me on. It's good to see you.
Of course, it's definitely been a minute since we chatted, but I reflect back to that first video we recorded, and on the airport mesa in Sedona, constantly pausing for the airplanes and the helicopters as they flew around us. Wow, that was seems so long ago, and everything has
Yeah,
changed.
that was a masterpiece of improvisation as we recorded on multiple iPhones because we didn't really have a sound system. And
Yes, we really did. Just to cover, I remember we had one iPhone set up on one side and the other set up on the other side, so that when you turned away, that was
Mhm.
before I even had microphones, lavaliers. Wow, we made it happen though. Thanks for saying
Yeah,
yes, way back when.
thanks for doing it.
Of course, of course. So I like to open the conversation up just to see what has your life consisted of this last year, and how has your yoga practice developed over the course of isolation and other worldly affairs?
Yeah. Well, just real briefly, my yoga teaching situation, um, in addition to the Climate Yogi Project, uh, where for that I had um, regular, but not real frequent, if that makes sense, in-person workshops here. And then I also taught several classes a week at what I consider to be my home studio in the Maryland area here, a place called Willow Street Yoga. And when the pandemic hit, of course, all the in-person teaching shut down, and everybody moved over to Zoom and online classes. And so I did that too. Um, I had also just finished, um, well, take that back, just started an online climate yogi teacher training that I had people on from the US, and a person from New Zealand and one from British Columbia, on the climate yogi training. And we started that training right at the start of the pandemic, before people really realized what it was going to be. And so that took a couple of months to finish up. Um, and through that time, actually with that group, every week we would come together and we'd kind of process what was going on, because we were scattered, around the world to some degree, hearing the different things that were going on in different areas, and just supporting each other through that was unexpected, but very meaningful. Um, and then, I pretty much just hunkered down here, along with my wife, here, and taught my online classes. Um, I did start a class, which I'm still doing, um, that shows up on the climateyogi.org website, I call it a pay it forward yoga class. Um, I don't charge for it. Some people choose to donate, but the spirit of the class, which really arose with the pandemic response, was to help people out. And the idea is that I'm offering this class to you, and all I really ask that you do is find some way to help someone else out. So
Beautiful.
that's the pay it forward yoga. Um, and I do that on Thursday morning here in the East Coast time. Um, so, yeah, that's kind of a pandemic uh, summary of what happened with my yoga teaching and things like that. And, we're just coming out of that now. The studio has um, opened up some in-person classes, but I'm still doing the online teaching because at this point, a lot of people still want that. And I'm actually serving more people online than could fit in one of the studios.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great tool. I think that's one of the most beautiful things that this last year has exposed us to is the powerful, successful, ethical use of technology. As you can understand, cutting down on the gas tank even to go drive to a studio, it can be, although there's nothing that quite gives you that sensation of practicing in a group setting yoga with others, you can still find some unique personal benefits from practicing in general. So there's always trade-offs, but I know that you're someone who could appreciate the eco um, print that is benefited from the technological uses.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's awesome. So what are some of the things that you teach in your climate yogi teacher training that you would say differs from your traditional yoga training?
Hmm. Lots.
Yeah,
So maybe a little brief background on the climate yogi idea.
please.
Um, the idea for climate yogi arose in 2017 uh, as a response to two interests that I had. One was teaching yoga, and the other was um, grappling with how to personally respond to the climate crisis. Um, and there's lots of ways that people choose to do that. Some people choose to pretend it doesn't exist. Some people choose a path of on the streets political activism. Other people support organizations. Some people feel like they try to do their own individual actions, live a more sustainable life, and decrease their carbon footprint and kind of leave it there. And other people um, really want to get involved in collective action, um, feeling that only by a lot of people doing things together can we actually make a difference. And so it's all over the map. And I was grappling with all those things as well too. And I thought yoga is such a powerful um, practice for transformation and change that there has to be a way that yoga is relevant to the climate crisis. And so I kind of came up with the idea for it and then spent about a year figuring out how to make it actually work. Um, so the climate yogi teacher training is really about the intersectionality of the climate crisis and the practices of yoga. It's very little about yoga asana, although the physical embodied practice is vital, so that's incorporated. But it's more about some of the concepts of yoga that help us deal with fear and help us move beyond fear, help us to feel our connection and the way that we are actually part of everything that happens, and that our actions really do matter. Whether it's a tiny little action or a big action, it all matters. The more of the ethical and philosophical aspects of yoga, and then also um, an overview or sufficient amount of actual information about the climate crisis itself, what has caused it, what the solutions may be. So the climate yoga teacher training, which I developed as an online series of modules and presentations, I delivered it online. It's not something you can just take yourself online. But it was intended to bring people into that intersectional space, primarily aimed at yoga teachers, but certainly not exclusively. Um, I had a person in the class that I did. It was actually my first class that I did right before the pandemic hit, and I haven't done another one since. But that's on my list to get that going again.
That's amazing. So you do intend to start that back up, and I'm sure people would be able to find information to that on your climateyogi.org website. I know you'll be keeping up with that. What's another way people can stay up to date with any of the updates? I know you were doing absolutely beautiful emails weekly there, or no, it was monthly for a while there. Are you still doing that?
Um, I'm going to start that up again.
Nice.
I haven't, yeah, a lot, the pandemic response sucked a lot of, well, that's the wrong thing to say. The pandemic changed the energy, and I spent, as I mentioned before we started the formal interview, I spent a lot of the pandemic time working with people in the local community on climate community projects. And that took a lot of my energy in that direction and away from the broader climate yogi interaction with the yoga community. And now it's time to kind of bring it back. But I learned a lot in the process of doing that about um, the need for people at the local level to be able to get together and support each other and work together.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, because it requires that community building understanding of education and giving people an opportunity to experience. A moment ago, before we started the interview, as you said, we were discussing something that you're working on at a local co-op where you're actually bringing in kids and families together to perform duties. How would you say that is impacting the community and the lives of the people who you help through that process?
Well, this is an urban farm. So it's a farming situation where we're growing vegetables, and so many things, right? And I think about the connections of yoga, the history of yoga, um, and the connection to the food that we eat. And what this farm does is it brings people from the community together from all ages. Some of them are under 10, um, and on up to people who are retired age, working together on this plot of land to grow food. And some of the food is sold to the community through a farm stand, and a lot of the food is actually given away and donated to some organizations that feed people. Um, and so I think the thing that really ties it together is that this is an opportunity for people of diverse backgrounds and ages to come together and work to a common purpose that is regenerative. It's growing food organically. There's no chemicals, fertilizers, or herbicides, pesticides used at all. It's a very life-filled environment, and I just love to be there and work. I was there last night for 2 hours digging a particularly pernicious weed out of some of the garden beds.
Oh,
Um, and but while I was there doing that, other people around me in other places were working on other parts of it. And so there's this sense of community, there's a sense of doing something for other people, and also learning the skills of how to successfully grow good food, which is a important life skill, I think.
Yeah, it's a life skill, and I'd go as far as to say it's a commodity. It's something that we have to that we get to continue to grow towards and help others. And that's one thing. I'm just so amazed and happy to hear what you're doing to help your local community. And I look forward to seeing how this video and more things that you're working on can impact the lives of people that extend far beyond your community, yet find themselves being another key species in that community. So I want to ask you a question. Back in 2017, you started the climateyogi.org project. You started your brand ultimately, but I know your passion for that and protecting the climate likely started much further back than 2017. So what were some of those things that you experienced or witnessed that helped to kind of push you into the spotlight to start making an impact and educating people on what they're doing and why it matters?
Hmm. Well, I'd like to be able to say that I was really tuned into the climate issue way back, but I wasn't. Um, it drifted in and out. You know, I
Mhm.
I was educated um, in marine fisheries biology, ocean fisheries, and so I have that background of education in biology and ecology and the natural world, and all my life I've loved nature and being outdoors and plants and animals and things, and been concerned about the environment. Um, but I didn't, the magnitude of the climate situation didn't find me early on.
Mm.
I kind of drifted in and out of it. Al Gore's initial Inconvenient Truth back in around 2000, that was important. That was a wake up call at that point. Um, but I was still working in my career in marine fisheries at that time. And the thing that really started to get my attention was that the science of fisheries, which was looking at where the fish are in the ocean and are they being successful, are they reproducing well or not, and where they're distributed, started to be showing strong signals. Fish on the Atlantic coast that were in the Carolinas and Georgia and Florida part of the coast started showing up farther and farther north. And even some of the species that normally the top of their range was around my area started showing up in New England. And when that started showing up in the scientific data, that was like, whoa, this climate change isn't something that's happening in the future. There's
Mhm.
stuff going on right now. Um, and then there's just been this cascade of stuff, with the Hurricane Katrina was another big wake up call in 2005. So I'd say my real intense awareness and I guess dedication to try to do something about this uh, is uh, a decade old maybe, but building on um, a lifetime of concern about the environment and love for nature.
Of course. Of course. How would you say we as a species are handling it in 2021? We've gone through a big transformation of 2020. Some will say that it set it back a little bit in using some of the non-renewables, such as some of the single-use disposables. But how would you say as a whole, in your opinion, we are handling the climate crisis in 2021?
Um, I don't think we're handling it much at all,
Yeah.
to be honest. Um, one of the things that really bothers me um, is that our political system worldwide, certainly here in the United States, is largely controlled by old people. You know, you look at the average age of people in the Senate, and I think it's probably older than I am. And if you look at the people who have a lot of money and are controlling a lot of the dialogue about what goes on, um, they're also, I mean, some of them are in their 80s or even 90s. They've had their whole lifetime spent accumulating money and power. And here they are in the last decade or two before they pass on, um, controlling the future for people your age and, you know, my grandchildren. Um, the youth movement in the climate space is the biggest bright spot out there. The Sunrise Movement and internationally, the youth climate activists. But we have this group of people who are clinging on to old ways of thinking and the power and the money they have. And I think until that dam breaks somehow, and the power is moved from their hands, um, it's hard to see things really getting a lot better. I know that doesn't sound very optimistic, but it seems realistic to me.
Yeah, I would agree with
So,
you. Go ahead. Sorry.
well, I was just going to say, you know, I just want everybody that's my age or older to get the hell out of the way and let the younger generation create the world they are going to live in. And I think as might call us elders, if we were good elders, if we were good ancestors, we would step back from trying to control everything, and we would support the generations that are coming up in creating the world they want. And we're not doing that.
Yeah, bravo. I think that was very well articulated and very well said. The planet is calling out for a shift, and we just have to be listening. Unfortunately, some are, and those who are becoming ever more passionate as the years tick by to speak out about it and make an impact on that. So thank you for having that voice for, planet Earth and the climate, because it's sometimes I think the older generation, the elders, have a hard time, not all, but some of them have a hard time listening to the youth. There's wisdom that comes with age that sometimes is held at a higher standard than the newer nuanced perspectives, right? And I think hearing an elder speak on the implications of what we're doing is very important. So I thank you for being a credible voice to the society at large.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah. So what does yoga mean to you? And I know that's a big question, and we touched on it a little bit. You said it means more than the asanas, and I think that that's powerful, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more. What does yoga mean to you?
Um, One of my favorite, most referenced books about yoga is Desikachar's book, The Heart of Yoga. Um, and one of the things that kind of amuses me about that book is that I don't know how many different ways, dozens at least, there'll be a sentence that says yoga is, or the meaning of yoga is X. And then 2 pages later, yoga means Y, right? So yoga is a very, very rich term with a lot of meanings, and I know that you know that. And I guess I would say that to me, it means, it is a very rich thing. I can't say it means a single thing, but it means, at its heart, the way that I relate to everything else. And Desikachar talks about yoga fundamentally as relationship. And I think that was really impactful to me because a lot of times we practice yoga and we may conceptualize yoga as a personal practice or something that we're doing as an individual for ourselves. Turning inward, that's commonly people say, I'm turning inward, I'm working on my internal life and that kind of thing. Yes, and fundamentally, none of us are separate. We're connected to the whole all the time in every way. And so yoga is really about our relationship, how our identity and the universe are connected. So that plays out in many different ways. I first came to yoga because I was not happy with my attitude. I was in the middle of my career and I had a lot of stress, and I just felt that my life was too negative. My thoughts were too negative. And somehow that led me to yoga. So it has meant that as well. It's meant a way to manage my own energy and my own responses to things, and to be a better person, to be have more positive energy. I'll quit there for now.
No, that's beautiful. You, how would you say that's working? Did you see an impact on it changing your overall attitude?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, um, there was a time early on, a few months into my practice, that has, you know, I've remembered for a decade or more. This has to do with the issue about how you react to things, or how I would react to things. And events would come in. Driving is a great place to practice yoga. The worse the traffic is, the better the practice it is. And if you think about the things that happen when you're out in the world and somebody does something, or somebody, doesn't make the turn when they should, or they cut you off, or they're looking at their phone at the stoplight so you can't go when it turns green. And just notice your reaction to those things. And what happened was I had left my house in my car, driven just a few blocks up and over a hill down to a stoplight. And there was a car in front of me at the stoplight that could have made a turn, and then I could have gone on. But for whatever reason, the light turned and they were just sitting there. And at the moment when my normal reaction would have been to have gotten mad and started honking at them, I found myself just kind of thinking, well, it's a really beautiful day out today, and it doesn't really matter.
Mm.
And then soon they woke up and went on. But what happened was I didn't have that reaction. I didn't get triggered. And I thought, oh, this is different. It's got to be the yoga.
Wow. Yeah, that's a beautiful story to help explain the benefits, because I do think that it becomes the ability to expand your perspective, right? Accepting that, oh, say somebody is having a bad day and you see them mistreat a gas station clerk. Instead of judging them, offering them compassion and understanding, maybe they just lost a loved one, or they lost, anything. It doesn't have to be that extreme, obviously, to have a bad day, but on another scale, in the same concept, having compassion for the person who's sitting at the stoplight is huge. And that comes from the ability to shift our perspective from a narrow vantage to a much wider vantage. And as we shift that, we notice the birds, and we notice the blue sky and the trees. And so that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I learned later, years later, again in Desikachar, he talks about this. Um, and he talks about yoga as a practice of raising your awareness, as you say, expanding your awareness, and then allowing you to choose
Hmm.
so that you're not just responding or reacting out of the deeply ingrained patterns. This pisses me off, so I'm going to yell at the person or whatever. But that you are actually acting consciously with choice. And there's a, a sentence in Desikachar's book, at some point, where he says, there's no requirement to react. When something happens or something does something to you or somebody says something that's mean to you or something, there isn't any requirement to react to that. But yet, so many people out there in the world, and you've seen it, and I see it even more since I've learned yoga. You walk around in the streets and you just see people who are just being triggered by everything, and they're unhappy and they're pissed off and they're making other people miserable too. Um, and I do think that that's one of the big benefits that can come from a practice is that you may find that you just don't do that so much anymore.
And if that's the only thing you get from yoga, I'd say that's a lot, an awful lot, wouldn't you?
Big win, yeah.
I love it. So what are some of the easy, simple take-home tips you can give anybody listening at this point of the interview that they can begin introducing into their life, into their community, into their daily routine that can have a large, lasting impact in a positive way for the environment and the climate crisis?
Hmm. Um, this is not easy. It's simple,
Hmm.
but it's not easy. Um, I think that the most powerful thing that someone can do starting out is to make an honest evaluation of their life and look at all the places, all the direct uses of fossil fuels um, in their life. Because the more fossil fuels that are consumed, every gallon of gasoline that's burned is 20 pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere. Um, and the gas that's used for cooking and for heating homes and things like that, all of that matters. And it's not easy and it's not inexpensive to change. But if you at least will take an inventory of the way your life is currently living out and what activities are using fossil fuels, you may find that just that awareness brings you to making choices. So we're back to that again, making different choices. So maybe you just through that awareness don't drive quite as much, or you decide not to go on the yoga retreat to Costa Rica by plane, but to do something more local at home. Um, and I'm not saying at all, there's no judgment here that everybody should do all those things. Um, I trust that people who are practicing yoga regularly, that once they start to raise this stuff up in their own awareness, it will affect the choices. And I'll say for myself, um, there's several things in my life, the life of our household, where I've found ways to stop using fossil fuels. Um, and there are still some things that are there, right? We still have natural gas heat, for example, because we had put in a new heater just a couple of years before I got smart about this. And um, there's an environmental cost of replacing that as well. So you have to balance those things out. So I think raising your own awareness about the impacts of your life vis-a-vis fossil fuels. And the other thing I would say is plastics, because plastics come from fossil fuels, and most plastics at the end of their life are not recycled, but are either buried in a landfill someplace or they're burned. And of course, if they're burned, it's just a more delayed pathway into the air.
Yeah.
So reducing plastics, reducing fossil fuels, and just starting out on that path, and being compassionate with yourself, and not beating yourself up because you can't always choose a carbon-free alternative always.
I think all of those are spectacular. I think that what I want to just reiterate is the very last thing you said, having compassion for yourself and for others. Because as we, when you first come online, when you first awaken to the reality of what we're talking about here, it can be a lot. I remember when I first came aware of all of this, it almost can so easily be a very direct pathway to resentment and to judgment and to all sorts of negative emotions that do not serve us either. So what would you say, could you speak on anything to help people who, we take an inventory on ourselves and then not judge the guy who has the Hummer who lives 2 doors down from you? What are some ways you have maybe wrestled with that in your own life, or could offer guidance through that process? Are there anything you'd like to say on that?
Yeah, I still get pissed off about the Hummer. Um, but I think the main thing is just realizing that people don't change usually. People don't change because um, you make them feel guilty about something. And that actually being critical to people about what they are or aren't doing, um, the strongest thing that happens when people are criticized is that they actually entrench their position. Um, so it's hard to not say, well, I've done my part, but my neighbor is, you know, more than making up for everything I've saved by what they're doing. Um, but realizing that the path to change for people is when they can see themselves moving in a positive direction.
Mm.
And maybe that will happen for your neighbor, and maybe it won't. You can't control that. But um, being an example, and then being generous, and maybe making opportunities for people to join in with the positive direction you're doing, um, and then not criticizing them if they don't join in, right? Because again, anytime that negative energy is sent out, it's going to set everything back. But at the same time, you want to really be. Um, you also, you don't want to sugarcoat things. You want to be honest about why you're doing things and how important you feel it is. So share your own story and share your own values and say, I'm doing this. I'm taking this action because I I love monarch butterflies, and I want there to be monarch butterflies for my grandchildren. Whatever it is for you, everybody has their own experiences and the things that they really treasure, and the neighbor with the Hummer does too. And if you can connect at that human value level, there's a chance that that resistance that they have or that denial that they have will soften, and you may find, that they start thinking a little bit more about it, and maybe that leads them to some change as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a really appropriate and noble way to handle the situation. Lead by example, get people curious, offer opportunities. I love that you said that. That's huge. And eventually, everyone's attracted to somebody who's living their purpose, because it's very noticeable by anybody when you see somebody who's living their purpose. So I'd like to thank you for living your purpose and committing yourself to helping the younger generation experience the beauty of this world and the little things like monarch butterflies. So thank you. I would like to, I know you mentioned earlier The Heart of Yoga being a really impactful book on you, and you referenced it so beautifully so many times through this interview thus far. But I'd like to open it up to see if there's any other books or programs or interviews or TED Talk, anything that has impacted you, so that we can give people, again, these opportunities to dive a little deeper and conduct some own research and start figuring out who they are and what they want to do as well.
Yeah. There are non-yoga things out there that are a little more in the environmental and climate space. There's a book by a woman named Kimmerer called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is just a wonderful book. I recommend that to everybody. But in addition to Desikachar's book in the yoga space, and I have a lot of yoga books, but the other book that I look at and read more than any other, and I happen to have it right here,
Nice.
is this little book by Donna Farhi called Bringing Yoga to Life. And there's not a picture in this book. There's nothing in it about how to do triangle pose. But it's about the practice of yoga. It's structured around Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, at least loosely. And it's just a wonderful book. It's just full of really insightful observations and anecdotes from her teaching and practice. And I'm sure you remember that the practice that I did, I structured around something I call the 6 gifts of yoga, which is a framing that I do use a lot in my teaching. Calmness, clarity, compassion, courage, connection, and contentment. 6 words that start with C. And at some point, as I was working on climate yogi and things, those words came to me, and I kind of structured them together and called them 6 gifts of yoga. Later, going back and rereading Donna's book, I didn't, those 6 words aren't together in that same way, but they're all there.
Wow.
And she uses some of those same words, and I realized, I got that, the basis of that from her. So I owe her a lot, and I keep going back to that book more than any other.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the very first video I recorded for Yoga for You. So we'll link that below in the description section below. So be sure, if that piques your interest, go down there and give it a try. It's a beautiful practice and beautiful sadhana, and it turned out very nicely. Yeah, very, very happy to have that offered, and I hope one day to be able to offer quite a bit more as we, link up. I feel like our paths will certainly cross one day again in person, but for now, this is a very fantastic way to connect and to spread purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you again, Galen, for just coming on here and chatting. I think this has been an absolutely incredible talk, and I'd love to host you again sometime, and maybe we could dedicate another chat to just going over some of the more fundamental maybe gardening tips or things that people can plant in their garden or easy intro um, practices for taking that next step and developing a green thumb, because I think that'd be fantastic to say, okay, if you plant milkweed, then you can help the monarch butterfly population in your area. Like these little tips that stack on top of each other, and everyone's got a space for at least one pot on their porch. You know what I mean? And they can start there with something, and begin to nourish that and see what happens.
Yeah, I'd love to do that, you know, and I'll share with you one thing that I learned that as a biologist for my career, I actually felt kind of stupid about it, but my excuse is that I was focused on things in the water.
Of course.
And it was learning that birds, over 90% of the birds, songbirds, terrestrial birds that we have, robins and chickadees and jays and things like that, over 90% of them, when they're, no matter what they eat as adults, some of them eat beetles and some eat worms and some eat um, seeds and nuts and things like that. But no matter what they eat as adults, when they're feeding their babies, they feed them mostly insect caterpillars, because insect caterpillars are soft, so they can get them down the baby's throat, and they're highly nutritious. And a pair of chickadees to raise one brood, one clutch of eggs, takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 thousand caterpillars
Wow.
that they have. So that's why the parents are so busy. But here's the connection. The birds have to have insect caterpillars. Insect caterpillars really only live on native plants because they're co-evolved. They don't, let's like monarch butterflies and milkweed, that's a tight connection, right? And a plant that comes from Europe or Asia or South America isn't going to support the insect population. And so it's this really direct connection between native plants and having any of the rest of the life around that we love, like the butterflies and the birds and things. And that was like, wow, that's obvious,
Yeah.
but I hadn't thought about it, you know. And so that's one of the other areas that in addition to growing vegetables, I've really gotten interested and involved in um, what's sometimes called rewilding, bringing bringing native plants back into landscapes uh, instead of just buying whatever's handy at Home Depot's garden center or whatever. Um, and so, yeah, and I see that as directly connected back to yoga as well, um, because it's relationship, and it's how I'm using my energy to support life, um, and just be more aware of things. So I'd love to talk to you about that sometime.
Yeah, that's a whole another interview that we are absolutely going to set up. Thank you for that beautiful tip. And I really trust that the people who have listened this far have a deep love for your what you're spreading, what you're sharing. And I just want to again push anybody who loved this interview to Galen's website. It's climateyogi.org. Go there, check out some of his offerings. I'm sure he has some information on his classes that he offers, and you could get that information there for Thursday mornings. And I know he sells these incredible shirts that say Climate Yogi. So that's a great way to make a contribution and have something to represent and show everyone around you who you are and what you're made of. I know that there's also spaces there to donate to help his cause. So if any of these speak to you, please, please head over there and help this movement move, because it's
Yeah,
not without us that it does move.
yeah, I'd love to see folks check that out. And if you want to sign up on the list, I'll be starting up my monthly newsletter again in September. Um, and then the teacher training will come after that. Again, another round of that.
Yes. I feel like we're going to have you on here just before you're, somewhere in between September and when you're ready to launch that next round of teacher training. And let's fill it up. Let's absolutely pack the house and let's give everyone the opportunity on a global platform to really get in there and learn, because I can only imagine how intricately you've packed the knowledge into a course like that. So thank you for really just dedicating your life and purpose to
Well, thank you, Ty.
this.
Really appreciate you making this platform available.
Of course. Of course. Well, best of wishes for you and blessings all around for this harvest as it comes time. And we'll be in touch. And thank you so much.
Ty, thank you very much.
Hey everybody, really hope you enjoyed that talk. It was beautiful to have that experience with that shared guest. We have a lot of very useful information in the description section below, so be sure to check it out. I've also linked any and all videos with that individual in the description below, so check those out as well. It's an honor to bring this footage to you, and I hope you can come back and continue to deepen your practice. Namaste.